For a different style of epoxy floor, you may like what's called metallic epoxy. Metallic epoxy and the effects will create a unique and artistic look for your floor by layers that are applied to achieve superior durability and that one-of-a-kind look. This is a 100% solids epoxy that works with chemical reactions to make a creative design on your floor. It is a very high-quality epoxy, but keep in mind this metallic epoxy does not like UV light, so if you get a lot of sunlight in your garage, this metallic epoxy will fade. You can use this epoxy indoors like in a basement. The only difference between using this epoxy indoors as opposed to a garage is the top coat that is applied. Inside, it's a high-gloss top coat, and when it's applied, there is very low odor and no flammability. It's also self-leveling. In a garage, it's an eggshell finished top coat that you will roll on. When you purchase the metallic epoxy from Car Guy Garage, you will be given the options of the square footage and if it will be in an interior or a garage space. The only difference is the top coat that is shipped with the kit. Let's go through all the steps to apply this metallic epoxy to your floor. Step 1. Grind the floor. This is an important step that no one should skip even if you have new concrete. You need a rough surface on the concrete so that the epoxy has something to grab. It should look similar to 100 grit sandpaper. You need to contact a local tool rental or hardware store to rent a floor grinder. Floor grinders either use water from a garden hose or suction from a vacuum to keep the dust down. You plug the machine in and walk it up and down the floor similar to walking a lawnmower. The hardest part about the floor grinder is getting it to your garage from the rental location. These are usually bulky machines, but they are typically easy to operate. Step 2. Etch and clean. The first chemical you use from the Car Guy Garage kits is Etch and Clean. This is a phosphoric acid solution that removes contaminants from the concrete. Pour it onto the concrete and use a stiff bristle brush to give the floor a good scrubbing. This acid should only have contact with the concrete for a maximum of 10 minutes. Triple rinse it thoroughly with water. Power washing is ideal and allow the floor to dry a minimum of 8 to 10 hours before moving to the next step. Step 3. Primer and sealer. The next chemical you'll be using does 3 things. It provides a primer bonding coat, seals the concrete from air and or moisture coming from under the slab, and sets up the first color layer. What you're technically doing is using a colored waterborne epoxy as the primer so that you can get the final decorative look. The color of the waterborne epoxy used in this step will be different depending on the final result you're after. You'll mix together part A and part B in 5-gallon bucket. First, empty all the part A into the bucket and slowly add part B while you are mixing. Once the two components are thoroughly mixed, you have about 50 to 70 minutes to use it before it will become too hard. It is best to use a 3/8-inch nap roller and a brush to cut in the edges. Start with the area furthest from the exit door and work your way toward the door. It has a very low viscosity, so it's easy to put down. 1 gallon will cover 250 square feet. It should be applied in one even coat to completely cover and penetrate the surface. The finished look will depend on how porous the concrete is. The more porous, the more textured it will appear. Wait until you can walk on it, generally 7 to 10 hours, before you move to the next step. Application thickness and cooler temperatures can extend this time, so make sure it's completely dry before moving on. Step 4. Apply the epoxy base coat. This step is extremely time sensitive. You have a limited amount of time to combine these chemicals so that you get the proper finished look. Once the base coat and effects process has started, you need to mix and apply as quickly as possible to finish the entire floor for a uniform look. For applications larger than 200 square feet, you want 3 people for this step because the epoxy only has a 30-minute window before it gets too hard to use. 1 person will mix material. 1 person will brush and roll. 1 person will apply the effects. Do not start this step if anything is wet, it's raining, or it's very humid. You do not want condensation to settle on the epoxy coating during the application or curing process. Let's get started. First, mark off 200 square foot sections on your floor. Because each epoxy base coat set covers 200 square feet, this gives you boundaries for how far one can should spread. You can use chalk on the primer coat to mark sections off. Next, create a mixing station where your cans of base coat and effects can be mixed. Put down a drop cloth, then organize and open all the cans. Everyone should put on their spiked shoes so they're ready to move once things are mixed. Remember to tighten all the screws on the spiked shoes before you put them on. Start with mixing each can of base coat part A separately, so that any pigment that may have settled will get resuspended. Once all the part A cans have been individually mixed, take the first part A can and add the part B. Use a paint stir stick to vigorously mix the material together, creating a smooth consistency. Make sure you scrape the bottom and the sides of the containers. Note that most pigments create a swirl pattern in the material even after it is completely mixed. You just don't want to see any clear streaks. You are now under a time crunch because in 30 minutes this mixture will become hard. Begin by painting in the corner furthest away from the exit of the room. Pour a small portion around the edges of the 200 square foot section you will be covering, and then pour the rest of the material onto the floor and ribbons, making sure not to pour it outside of the chalk area. Once the material is out of the can completely, use a brush to cut in around any walls and use a 3/8 inch roller to aggressively move the material around. You need to work quickly. After the epoxy has been evenly spread out, quickly backroll the area with your roller in one direction to give it an even finish. Immediately after applying the epoxy, apply the metallic effects. Step 5. Applying the metallic effects. You have a maximum of 8 minutes after your epoxy-based coat has been applied to use the effects, so work quickly. Otherwise, the effects won't spread evenly. You need to have the metallic effects ready to go before the other person applying the epoxy-based coat is finished rolling out the 200 square foot chalked-in section. You will use 2 metallic effects sets, 2 cans of Part A and 2 cans of Part B, for each 200 square foot section of wet epoxy base coat. These 2 sets will make 2 quarts of final mix material, so you need to have a container that will allow you to mix them without spilling. A 1-gallon bucket works well. Pour in 2 cans of the metallic effects Part A and 2 cans of the metallic effects Part B into the 1-gallon bucket. Mix them thoroughly by hand with a paint stir stick. These cans are pre-measured at a 2-to-1 mix ratio, with the final mix result of all 4 cans being 2 quarts. With your spiked shoes on, walk over the wet epoxy base coat. Take a paintbrush and saturate it in the effects mixture. With the paintbrush bristle side down, sprinkle the effects onto the wet epoxy. This will leave drops and splatters of different sizes depending on brush size and saturation of the brush. Apply the effects as heavy as possible, keeping the drops of effects close together. Overlapping of effects gives the floor a much more appealing and dramatic look. The team effort of 1 person mixing, 1 person applying the base coat of epoxy, and 1 person applying the metallic effects needs to be kept in motion until the entire floor has been completed. Once the whole floor is complete, you can apply whatever effects you may have left wherever you see fit. Over the next few hours, the effects will morph and spread. You should not move to the next step until the floor is completely cured and hard. This will take a minimum of 14 hours. The effects areas are usually the last spots to harden, and they need to be completely hard, not soft, before you move on to the top coat. You also should not exceed 24 hours before applying the top coat. So the top coat should be applied somewhere between 14 to 24 hours once the epoxy and effects have been applied. Step 6. Top coat for the garage. Step 6 has 2 versions depending on your application, the garage or the interior, because these are 2 different top coats. If you're applying the top coat inside, you can jump ahead to the next slide. Now let's talk about using the top coat for your garage. The garage top coat is a high-wear urethane. It comes as 3 parts that mix together create 1 gallon and cover 600 square feet. For this step, you'll put your spiked shoes back on. Start by pouring Part A with Part B into a 5-gallon bucket. Thoroughly mix them together. Continue to mix them and add in Part C until you have a completely uniform mixture. You can use a paint stir stick or a slow-speed power mixer, but avoid whipping air into the coating. Make sure they are mixed extremely well. Once mixed, you have 1 to 2 hours before it becomes too hard to roll out. Pour the mixed material into a paint tray. Using a 3/8 inch and out roller, apply the top coat at a rate of 600 square feet per gallon. Unlike the epoxy, you want to apply the top coat by rolling out any excess material on the roller tray before you put the roller onto the floor so that you apply the material in thin, even coats. It is almost impossible to over-roll this material, so if any area is uneven, re-roll it until it's uniform. You also want to remix the material as you apply it so it stays mixed throughout the application process. Once you've coated the entire floor without applying any pressure, re-roll the whole floor in the opposite direction. This will help blend in any roller and overlap marks. At 70 degrees, the top coat will be dry to the touch in 3 to 6 hours. It'll be ready for light foot traffic in 14 to 24 hours. It will be fully cured in 3 to 5 days. Step 6. Top coat for the interior. The interior version of the metallic epoxy kit comes with a top coat that is different than the garage version. If you got the garage kit, you can skip ahead to the wrap-up. If you got the interior top coat, you're in the right spot. Let's talk about the interior top coat. The interior top coat is a 100% solids epoxy with low odor, no flammability, and is self-leveling. When applied at 100 to 125 square feet per gallon, it will self-level to a glass-like surface. This top-coat comes as 1 gallon of Part A, the resin, and a half gallon of Part B, the hardener. They are in pre-measured kits and should be mixed as supplied in the kit. Pour both Part A and B into a 5-gallon bucket. Mix them well by hand or with slow-speed mixing equipment until the material is thoroughly mixed and streak-free. It's very important it's mixed extremely well, but do not whip air into it. After mixing, transfer the mixed material to another 5-gallon bucket and mix it again. Once it's been mixed in the second bucket, it's ready to be applied. The mixed material can be applied by brush, roller, or a serrated squeegee, and then back rolled. You'll put your spiked shoes back on to apply it. At 70 degrees, you have 20 to 30 minutes to apply the top coat before it becomes too hard. It will be dry to the touch in 6 to 8 hours, ready for light foot traffic in 14 to 18 hours, and fully cured in 2 to 7 days. The wrap-up. From start to finish, you can complete the entire epoxy application process in 4 days. Day 1. Grind, and then etch and clean the floor. Day 2. Apply the sealer and primer. Day 3. Apply the epoxy and effects. Day 4. Apply the top coat. You can walk on it the next day and drive a car on it about 7 days later. So depending on the weather, which impacts curing times, you'll basically be parking your car outside for about 11 days. Essential tools. A stiff bristle brush to scrub in the etch and clean. 3 3/8-inch nap rollers, 1 for the primer, 1 for the epoxy base coat, and 1 for the top coat. Roller frames and paint trays. 4 3/8-inch brushes for edging and drizzling effects. 1 or 2 5-gallon buckets, 1 for the primer which you can clean with water, and 1 or 2 for the top coat depending. The garage top coat needs 1 bucket. The interior top coat needs 2. 1 gallon bucket for the metallic effects. Chalk to mark the floor. Drop cloth for the mixing station. Spike shoes. Rubber gloves. Rags. Masking tape. Stir sticks. The primer coat is water-based, so after applying it, you can clean brushes, rollers, and buckets with soap and water. The epoxy base coat and top coat will need solvent to be cleaned off. You should be able to pick up some xylene at your local hardware store. Remember, it's best to have at least 3 people doing the project, especially when it comes to the epoxy base coat and effects. Take this into consideration with the supplies listed. You may want additional rollers, brushes, buckets, spike shoes, and gloves if you have additional people helping. If you have any questions, give Car Guy Garage a call at 800-736-9308 or email sales@carguygarage.com. Car Guy Garage carries all the products you need to epoxy your garage floor in easy-to-purchase kits set up by square footage at carguygarage.com. I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching.